Hey Alex. Alex. Aw, someone's in a mood, huh? I bet you are. July 4th, 1776, and don't you forget it, boy.
Every single year.
Yeehaw!
Now, I don't know when you're watching this, dear viewer, but at the time of recording, it has just been the 4th of July. Just another day for many, but for our American friends, it is of course the day whereby they celebrate nothing. Absolutely nothing of historical significance happened on that day, so don't bother looking it up, just trust me. No, but seriously, it is of course their Independence Day. A day whereby they celebrate officially breaking away from the British Empire and forging ahead with their own destiny. What a tragedy. Now, of course, I know many Americans, and as alluded to earlier, whenever the 4th of July hits, like clockwork, at least one of them will come to me and ask something along the lines of, "How are you feeling?" You see, many Americans seem to be under the impression that on the 4th of July, everyone in Britain walks around in funeral attire and spends the entire day sobbing over such a tragic loss. This is because Americans are under the illusion that the entire world revolves around them. Which, to be fair, it kinda does. But no, in reality, for us Brits, the 4th of July is just another boring day of trying not to get stabbed. I mean, you fellows have to understand that we British have invaded almost every country on the bloody planet. Half the world celebrates getting independence from us. You're not special. What even is the 4th of July anyway? What do you do? Make loud noises and eat? You do that anyway. No, this is not an event I will ever participate in or really understand, but that's besides the point. The 4th of July got me thinking that honestly, Americans get far too much heat from other countries. Everywhere you go on the internet, you'll see a plethora of anti-American rhetoric, and the irony is, it's mostly written by Americans themselves. 15 ways the United States is the best at being the worst. Oh, piss off. Now, America certainly has a lot of problems. Rampant obesity, corporate corruption, a garbage media, a useless government, terrible education, and identity politics out the woozah. Yes, the USA is clearly a nation in decline and needs fixing fast. But let's not pretend as if the rest of the world is doing great. The amount of smug Europeans who talk about America as if it's the worst place on earth, while also conveniently ignoring the fact that Europe is weaker, poorer, and less relevant than it has been in centuries, mostly because of this soulless abomination, is honestly unbelievable. And it especially irks me when my fellow Brits bang on about the Yanks when the UK itself is on the verge of breaking up thanks to our totally not out of touch London establishment. I mean, those in glass houses really shouldn't throw stones. Europe, when you stop electing moron social progressives and pensioner-obsessed economic conservatives and actually get the balls to start electing actual social conservatives and genuine economic progressives, then you can brag. But until then, shut up. The truth is that there's actually a lot of things that America gets right, and I think it's about time we take a hard look at their country and see what it is that we can incorporate from them. So, what should we imitate from America? Well, there's many things actually, but today I want to talk about just one of them, and that is self-defense. In the UK, we have a little something called castle doctrine. The basic idea behind castle doctrine is that if someone breaks into your property, you can use reasonable force to defend yourself and your family from any potential harm. I find that Americans seem to think they invented this, but they actually just got it from us. Castle doctrine has been in place now for hundreds of years, and though there has been some minuscule changes over time, the basic fundamental idea remains pretty much the same. Indeed, contrary to popular belief, in the UK, you don't have to warn the intruder that you are armed, wait to be attacked before you can fight back, run away and hide, use a weapon that's smaller than the intruder's, or even have the intruder be armed at all in order to use a weapon. No. The mere fact that some idiot is unlawfully in your property means that there's already some level of justification for suspicion in the first place. Obviously. But the key phrase here is reasonable force. You can't just murder a burglar unnecessarily after they've surrendered, but you most certainly have the right to do what you feel is necessary to defend yourself from harm within reason. I love castle doctrine because it simply makes sense. It's not too passive as to pacify the victim into inaction, but at the same time, it's not too harsh as to give the criminal an unreasonable verdict. If someone comes into your property uninvited, you have every right to give them a good wallop. Within reason. No, the problem I have with self-defense in the UK isn't to do with private property, but public property. The United States has a practice known as concealed carry, whereby their citizens are allowed to carry a weapon around in public so long as it's hidden from view, and naturally, only for self-defense purposes. Now, of course, there are limits. A seriously deadly weapon that you couldn't just reasonably walk around in public with is considered to be something like a rocket-propelled grenade or something like that. I mean, you can't just walk down the street with an RPG and expect everyone to be fine with you. Of course not. But do you know what's considered a seriously deadly weapon here in the UK? Let me show you. Trigger warning, this is some seriously heavy firepower. Alright, take a look at this bad boy. Yeah. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what is known as a butter knife. Now, of course, I can have this knife as I'm here in my house. But theoretically, what do you think would happen if I went outside my house just one step with this knife?
Oi lad, what the bloody hell do you think you're doing? That's a lethal weapon there, lad. Put down the butter knife quietly and peacefully.
Up to 4 years in prison. That's right. Going to any public place with a weapon in the UK is instantaneously considered a crime with the assumption of intent to use it. Up to 4 years in prison, not for stabbing anyone with it, or even threatening someone with it. No. Up to 4 years in prison, just for having the knife in your possession. I'm not making this up. There is no concealed carry, as there's simply no carry at all. This, in my opinion, is absurd. And to prove this point, I'd like to read this ridiculous farce. An American man asked a forum a very simple question. What is the best self-defense weapon in the UK? In response, a British man says,
Are you from the USA? In Europe, we don't leave the house in fear of being attacked.
Speak for yourself.
I've lived in London.
Every time.
For almost 20 years, and in some rather rough areas. I was mugged once by 2 guys who wanted my wallet. They claimed to have a knife. I wasn't interested to find out if they did. I gave them my wallet and called the police, who arrived within minutes. It cost me £15 and a little hassle. On another occasion, I was attacked by a gang. I ran and hid some more. They chased me for just under an hour until I lost them. I called the police. They arrived in minutes. If I had a knife and believed it may be worth using, I may not be here now. If we lived in a society like the US, where there is a mini public arms race, then if the average Joe carries a knife, the criminals carry a machete. So the public carry guns, and so do the criminals. All that does is increase the chance of someone getting shot. Get over the hero notion. This isn't Hollywood. Give them what they want. Run, hide, call for help. Live a little longer.
How about no? I believe that if I'm walking down the street and some twat tries to rob me, then I should be fully within my right to nuke him out of Earth's orbit. The idea that law-abiding citizens carrying weapons would somehow increase crimes is ludicrous. Surely crimes would go up in a world where only criminals are allowed to be armed. Like, oh, I don't know, now? I mean, the clown even said it himself. He got chased around by a gang for, quote, just under an hour? And he thinks that's acceptable? No! Ask yourselves, why is it that we, in the UK, pay millions of pounds to maintain our Trident nuclear missile systems? Is it because we actually want to use them? No! On the contrary, it's because we don't want to use them. It's a deterrent to prevent us from being intimidated by other states, and to ensure that we don't end up becoming the next Ukraine. So if we can apply this self-defense logic on a state level, why can't we also apply it on an individual level? Simple answer. Because the people who draft these moronic self-defense laws mostly live in wealthy gated communities that have a lower crime rate than heaven. Anyone who's ever lived in a rough area knows just how effective such self-defense rights would be at reducing the victimization of innocents. No woman should ever have to walk the streets at night scared that at any moment they might get raped. No pensioner should have to fear being overpowered by much stronger gangs of youth. And no poor person should ever have to fear that they might get what little they have taken from them by some scoundrels. Everyone should have a right to self-defense, whether inside or outside. I don't understand why only Americans seem to understand this. Is it not just common sense? How the British people, and much of Europe at large for that matter, have been convinced to accept an overbearing nanny state who promises to look after them but repeatedly proves incapable of doing so, I will never understand. The facts are that if you're a poor person in the UK, you know full well that the British government, whether Labour or Conservative, doesn't give a damn about you. A state that both disarms its own citizens while at the same time failing to keep them safe is a paralysis of oppression the likes of which is beyond shameful. So, what could be done about this absolute joke of a situation? Well, as I said, I think there's much we could learn from our American brothers and sisters. Firstly, let's talk non-lethal weapons. Pepper spray is obviously not considered a lethal weapon by anyone with sense. Unless someone had some sort of rare major allergic reaction to it, the worst effect someone is going to get from it is that they'll feel a bit drowsy for a while. But would you also believe me if I said that even pepper spray was also illegal? That's right, even pepper spray, something that was designed to be a non-lethal weapon of self-defense, is strictly prohibited for all British citizens. Let me tell you a story. A few years ago, a young woman was walking home in a nearby town. I believe it was sometime in the winter when it goes dark much more early, around 5 PM or so. Problem was, she never made it back. Naturally, she was reported missing by her parents, and search helicopters were scouting over the area at night to try to find her as a result. Not too long later, her corpse was found. As it turned out, a very mentally ill bloke who was moderately known in the area raped her and then killed her, whereby he then hid her corpse somewhere nearby. Now, obviously today the man is in prison and, at least on paper, justice has been served. But, and this is a bold statement, I'd go so far as to say that it wasn't just that man who killed that woman. I strongly believe that whenever a woman in the UK is raped or murdered in a similar fashion to that poor girl, that the British government has to be considered somewhat complicit in it. Because ultimately, it is them who have prevented the women of this country from defending themselves from such attacks. Newsflash, garbage Hollywood movies aren't real life. The facts are that men are far, far more physically powerful than women. The police aren't available here, there, and everywhere all of the time. Thus, there is no moral nor practical justification why women, and men for that matter, can't have the ability to defend themselves with such a non-lethal weapon. Because the chances are that if this lady had some pepper spray on her when she was attacked, she'd probably still be alive right now. But that's not her fault, that's these clowns' fault. This puritanical zero tolerance when it comes to self-defense almost makes the UK look as if we're trying to serve criminals. Then again, considering we're ran by them, that wouldn't exactly be much of a surprise. But let's pretend for a moment that we weren't ran by a bunch of self-serving Etonian imbeciles, but instead actually had a government who cared about the people. What is it that they would do? Very simple. The legalization of pepper spray and all non-lethal weapons for self-defense purposes via reasonable force across the entirety of the UK for all citizens who are 18 or over, have no criminal record and aren't a complete nut job is simply common sense. But what about actual self-defense weapons, like what the Americans have? I disagree with the idea that firearms should be legal for the general population in the UK, because much like how you can't apply British solutions to American problems, you also can't apply American solutions to British problems. Guns are, fundamentally, killing machines. They serve no purpose other than that explicit role. I defended the Americans' right to bear arms because 1. It's a fundamental part of their nation's foundation, and 2. Because they couldn't get rid of them even if they tried. On the contrary, the UK has never had a gun culture, and does, not a perfect, but quite a good job at keeping them out of the country at large, to the point where even criminals struggle to get their hands on one. With these factors considered, the idea of inviting firearms into the mainstream just seems beyond foolish. Criminals would naturally get their hands on them due to the obvious higher availability, and whenever an innocent civilian would get shot by them, the government who legalised such weapons in the first place would be retroactively scorned, and the right would be quickly overturned regardless. Extremely predictable scenario. On the contrary, however, everyday items such as knives, screwdrivers, and hammers will never be legislated into illegality by their mere existence alone, because their primary purpose isn't to harm. They're always going to be items in circulation, and thus always going to be easily available to criminals. Therefore, there is certainly an argument to be made that allowing citizens to conceal such, primarily as a self-defense deterrent, should, in fact, be allowed.
Alex, I'm not so sure about that one. I don't see how increasing the amount of weapons is going to possibly reduce crimes.
And this sounds like a terrible idea. I don't want to live in a country where people are armed.
Well, that's because you're a moron!
Oh!
You really have to understand the psychology of the common criminal. Criminals use knives, not necessarily because they actually intend to use them, but to merely intimidate people into giving them what they want. By arming citizens in tandem, however, they lose their primary bargaining chip, and thus are overwhelmingly likely to retreat. Ask yourself, what's the chance of a criminal, 1, risking a 25-year life sentence over murdering someone they don't even know, or 2, risking getting killed themselves by the person they aggressed? Extremely low. Arming citizens is a fantastic deterrent, not to just prevent crimes in the moment, but to prevent people from being inspired to become criminals in the first place. But if I know the British people, then I know that this approach simply wouldn't be appreciated everywhere, and thus, here's my proposal. Categorise the country into 2 distinct zones: low crime zones and high crime zones. Low crime zones are obviously quite prosperous places, whereby the idea of self-defense is seen to be absurd, because probably the only thing there to defend yourself against is a seagull. On the other hand, high crime zones are places where Grand Theft Auto is taken as a life manual, and fathers may as well be considered an extinct species. Whether or not your area was classified as high crime or low crime would depend mathematically in comparison to the rest of the country's crime rate. If you're curious to know whether you live in a high crime area, then take a look at this. If you recognise 5 or more images on an almost daily basis, then, I'm very sad to say, you do. For the people in high crime zones, evidently, the state has failed them, and thus, in the meantime, so long as they're 18 or over, have no criminal record, and aren't a complete nut job, then they would have the right to be able to conceal and carry everyday items such as knives on their person to use primarily as a deterrent for self-defense purposes. This way, people who live in out-of-touch gated communities don't have to worry about a sudden influx of unnecessary weaponry flooding their oh-so-precious neighbourhoods. But, for people who live in places that actually need them, they now have a deterrent as a means to defend themselves, mostly so they won't get chased around by yobs for just under an hour. Now of course, high crime zones aren't intended to stay that way forever. It's a designation of shame. The top priority for the residents and the local government of such places would of course be to get the crime rate down so that they become low crime zones. Self-defense is certainly a good temporary bandage to assist in this plight in the meantime, but really, it still isn't getting to the root of the problem. But what is the root of the problem? What are the actual causes of crime? Well, as mentioned earlier, championing dysfunctional social progressivism in tandem with selfish economic conservatism is a pretty good way to raise the crime rate pretty fast. But that's a rabbit hole that I'll go down at a different time. For now, I just wanted to point out the hypocrisy. Isn't it ironic how all our high-ranking politicians go around with a harem of bodyguards, or, in the case of the royal family, actually have their own privately trained army, both of which you, the taxpayer, actually pay for? Meanwhile, when it comes to your own self-defense, you're not even allowed to use a butter knife. What does that say about this country? It says that if you aren't a part of the cosmopolitan elitist overclass, that your life, the lives of your friends, and perhaps most importantly, the lives of your family, simply don't matter. I agree that in a perfect country, self-defense would never be required. But we don't live in a perfect country. On the contrary, we live in a country that is blatantly in decline due to innumerous terrible decisions. It really is time for the state to stop this puritanical idealism and get pragmatic. You can laugh at the Americans for many different reasons, but this is an issue that they get dead right, and we get dead wrong. A government is meant to empower its people, not the other way around. Self-defense should never be considered an offense. The facts are that this country requires a complete and utter reimagining. You know, it's so funny, I'm saying the UK is a joke, and right now, as I make this video, what's happening? The Prime Minister's resigning. I mean, this country is going to the dogs. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed that. I must apologise, by the way, I haven't really been uploading lately. I've been a bit ill, truth be told. Yeah, I don't know what it is, I've just felt very lethargic, very fatigued lately. I think it's something to do with the weather. You know, it's recently turned summer at the time of recording, and it's one of the rare times where we in Britain actually get to see this mythical creature called the sun. So yeah, I'm still getting used to it, you see. I'm gobsmacked. But yeah, I'm curious, what do you think about self-defense laws in the UK? And I'm especially interested to hear from my fellow Brits on this one, because honestly, I think it's a joke. I think it's an absolute joke. I can understand why some people might not want people to carry knives. Okay, sure, I can understand that. It might cost the NHS a fortune. But pepper spray? Non-lethal weapons? Why? What moral justification is there? I think this country's a joke when it comes to self-defense. I think it's one of our biggest shames. Nevertheless, I want to give a shout out to the Wall of Famers, and my word, folks, the wall is getting full, let me tell you. Sure is. My 2 pence, fantastic Morrowind memes, sir, I have to say. Nemesis 4534, Ardent Word, Daniel H, Crutonite, welcome to you, sir. V, Scott Brown, Andrew Hamrick, Philippe M, Geometry Dash, it's good to see you finally, my brother. Scrollphilus Rex, Viriday, good to see you, sir. Where's FR, Bob Page, King Gold Stang, fantastic gentleman, Denton Cassels, Aleph Ishara, hope I'm pronouncing that right, BW Gaming, Drager, Matthew East, and Trevor. My word, folks, if the Wall of Fame keeps growing as it is, it's going to get to the point where half my videos is me reading names. I wouldn't complain, honestly. You know, folks, not many people know this, but every Saturday, I do like a 12-hour-long radio show on the Discord server. I don't know if you know this, but I want to give it a shout out because I feel like it's a hidden secret. We've done it for like weeks now. So yeah, if you're interested in that, join. Maybe we'll talk about self-defense, who knows. Either way, wherever you are in the world, I hope you're doing better. Regardless, I'll see you next time.